and atmospheric science. Today, I would like to present the second speaker in our series of community conversations focusing on sustainability, climate change, health, and equity. Our second speaker here at KU Lawrence. This series is led by the interdisciplinary and interprofessional team of Shelley Bhattacharya, who is Associate Professor of Family Medicine and Community Health at KUMC, Beto Lugo, who is the Director of Clean Air Now, and myself. We are funded by an interdisciplinary seed grant from the Health, Humanities, and Arts Research Collaborative at KU. And I would also like to thank Alexa Smith at KUMC for hosting our Zoom, and Emily Ryan at the Commons for her helpfulness and team of videographers. With that, I would like to introduce our speaker, Ryan Bowersox, who is the Outreach and Marketing Director of Just Food, the food bank of Douglas County. Ryan is originally from the Ozark region of Southeast Missouri, and they've had a lifetime of working within food systems and fighting for food justice through advocacy and activism. As a child of a farming community in the Ozarks, Ryan was surrounded by poverty and hunger, and it was here they started connecting the dots of how existing food systems were failing. This awareness began their mission to address these issues. With over 15 years of professional experience in the hospitality industry, food education, and ground roots community organizing, Ryan joined the team at Just Food in 2019. Through their work at Just Food, Ryan works with community partners to address food waste as a sustainability and social justice issue. They are also the newest member of the Douglas County Food Policy Council, which is a joint city-county advisory board whose goal is to identify the benefits, challenges, and opportunities for a successful, sustainable local food system in Douglas County. The purpose of this council is to advise elected officials on food system-related policy issues and to provide a community forum for local food system development. Within the council, Ryan serves as chair of the Forward Working Group, leading a group of council members to address food waste issues in our community. Ryan also is an experienced cook who focuses on beautiful ingredients and the quote, using what you have approach in the kitchen. In their spare time, you can find Ryan experimenting in the kitchen, trading garden goods with friends, and negotiating with her toddler to eat more vegetables. And with that, Ryan.
Can you hear me? Can they hear me? You got it? All right, great. Let me know if I cut out at any point. Thank you all for having me. My name is Ryan Bowersox. I work over at Just Food. And the introduction, I really appreciate it. It's almost like I wrote it myself. So I'm going to be focusing in this talk today is mostly about food waste and how it relates to our work over at Just Food in combating hunger, and just bridging those gaps as far as when we talk about hunger and food insecurity. A lot of folks tend to just think of it as a socioeconomic issue or a social justice issue, but it is also a sustainability issue as well. And so I'm happy to tell that story and continue to tell that story out in our community. I will introduce Just Food first. Just Food is the food, diaper, and basic needs bank of Douglas County. We supply over 29 agencies throughout Douglas County with fresh produce, dairy products, meat, bread, and other pantry staples. We run a food pantry Tuesday through Friday where we serve 200 to 350 families per day. That's about 1,200 people per day that we serve just at our main location, not including those 29 other agencies. We are a team dedicated to our guiding principles and listening to our clients and community to serve the larger needs of our neighbors who are facing hunger. I also like to take a point when introducing Just Food to define what food insecurity versus hunger is. Food insecurity, defined by Feeding America, is the lack of access to food. So whether that be financial, transportation, things like that. But it's not just food to have access to, it's healthy and nutritious food. Culturally appropriate food. We can't just fill our pantry only with Anglo versions of what we think of pantry staples. Pantry staples mean a lot to a lot of different folks. So keeping that in mind. And then hunger is like the physical sensation that we feel when we skipped a meal or something. They are different. They are both extremely important, and we serve both. So that's an important distinction to make. In our mission statement, it's our mission to end hunger in our community by increasing access to healthy foods, reducing barriers to health and well-being, and then cultivating self-sufficiency. What I love about Just Food is that we are a very unique organization. Most places either just do a food bank or they just do a food pantry. We do both, and then we also do programming, and then now we also do production, which I'll get to here pretty soon. But it really goes into our mission about self-sufficiency. It's not just about giving someone a fish, it's about giving them a fishing pole, giving them the knowledge to be able to cook that fish in a lot of different ways, and then also the actual pan to be able to cook that food in. So this just kind of shows kind of how it works. So all of our food that comes into Just Food are in-kind donations from food drives, food recovery, and farms and gardens. Food recovery makes up about 83%, and when I say food recovery, I mean food that is being recovered from the community at food businesses, restaurants, grocers, places like that, and being brought into the food pantry. Food drives make up about 4.5% of the food that's coming in. Those are primarily used as more community engagement, but of course, getting those food donations is very welcomed as well. And then in-kind donations, I always say that, our in-kind donations kind of go way, way, way up after the first of the year because everyone starts a new diet and cleans out their pantry. So if you find yourself doing that in the next few months, please donate that food. Do not throw it out. And then farms and gardens, with partnership with the city, we have implemented a gleaning program with After the Harvest, which is a organization in Kansas City that brings volunteers together to go out to farms to glean. Gleaning is the practice of going out to these farms and getting produce that might not be like market desirable, so not your prettiest stuff, but it's still completely edible. So grabbing that food and making sure that it's not just going back into the ground, even though that is very important for the farmers and their soil. If it's edible, we want to make sure that we get it first. So that all comes into our food bank. And then as far as the food pantry side of it goes out to Douglas County households. Last year, we served over 12,000 individuals. However, our retention rate has gone up 40%. So back in 2019, it used to say, I think it was 61% of our shoppers would visit us maybe 3 times or less. That number has increased by 40%. So now we are a weekly staple errand in a lot of folks' list of things that they have to do every single week. Also our satellite pantries. So we have a mobile food pantry called the Cruising Cupboard, where we go out to different areas of Douglas County that are specifically experiencing more food deserts or food apartheid. And I want to make sure that I know that I define what the difference of those are. Food deserts are areas in which there's not adequate access to food. Food apartheid means that there are systemic issues that are contributing to why people aren't getting access. So it doesn't matter if you live right behind a Whole Foods if you can't afford the food that's in that grocery store. So that's, again, making the difference, making sure we know our definitions, because it's important to know those definitions and know that they're both equally important. And then our community partners. We have 19 school pantries. So school pantries are the big thing right now, especially that it's beginning of September. What we are finding is that our school pantries especially are experiencing a higher need. Pandemic aid has run out for a lot of families that have kids that are school age. Also, the Congress did not extend the free lunch program, and so a lot of families are experiencing all of a sudden having to pay for school lunches, and they haven't had to do that for 2 years. And what that does is that if there is a school lunch debt that cannot be paid, that child is then given food that might not be the most nutritious for them. With the shame stigma that's also attached to that, that child is more likely to throw that food out because they don't want to go to their table with the cheese sandwich. And where do they turn? They turn to our school pantry. So that's 2 meals that are being wasted. Not one of them is feeding somebody, but one got wasted in order to feed another person. Doesn't really make a lot of sense. So making sure that we are bridging those gaps and understanding where that food waste is happening. So our community partners do a lot of amazing work, and they serve, among all of our community partners, they serve an additional around 5,000 on average people per month. So what causes food insecurity? I wish I knew the answer to it. I wish there was an easy one. I get asked this question It's my most common question. So there's been so much research in what causes food waste, and at the end of the day, I kind of tell, or sorry, food insecurity. And at the end of the day, I tell folks, you know, there's not a place in the United States right now where you can live minimum wage and afford a 2-bedroom apartment. So what doesn't cause food insecurity at this point? Many people do not have the resources to meet their basic needs, challenges which increase a family's risk of food insecurity. And through this insecurity is closely related to poverty. Not all people living below poverty line experience food insecurity, and people living above the poverty line can experience food insecurity. So I think that's really important to know, because just because you're over the poverty line doesn't mean that you don't have exceptional student loan debt or exceptional medical costs, things like that. And then also keeping in mind the temporary need. If you walk outside and your tires are flat, like I did a few weeks ago, you know, that's $800 all of a sudden. And and I'm privileged. I was able to make that. I mean, it stung a little, but we made it work. Same if you just break your glasses, really small things like that. If you have 2 kids in diapers versus 1 kid in diaper. So it's all about that family's priorities. And I think that what we've learned over the pandemic, especially, is that we all have different priorities, right? And we have to accept that each family has a different priority. Each family makes decisions differently according to what they need. And so keeping that in mind, that there's no one face of hunger, that it's folks who work on this campus. It's folks that work in USD 497. It's the folks that you encounter, it's houseless folks that you encounter downtown. But it's also people who work 3 jobs. I came to Just Food as a shopper, and I had 3 jobs, and I worked plenty of hours, and I still couldn't quite get ends met. So when we talk about food recovery and food waste, this is the EPA's food recovery hierarchy. So keeping in mind that food waste happens at a lot of different levels, and that it's kind of my work with Food Policy Council and a couple of professors here at KU, Dr. Dietrich Earhart and Dr. Susan Harvey. I do a lot of data collection and work with them to do food waste audits out in the community. So to do things at restaurants, hopefully in people's homes eventually. And I'd love to get KU involved, maybe do a huge food waste audit. So I'll just put that nugget right in here while I'm on campus. So this is what we need to do first. So the first thing to do is to source reduction. You can do that very easily in your own practices. So I always give the anecdote of making guacamole for Super Bowl Sunday, right? So you go to the grocery store and you just expect there to be avocados even though they're not grown here, right? And you expect them to be perfectly ripe in the place that you want them. And then you buy a whole bunch and you make this guacamole and it's delicious, and then you get to the party and 4 other people made it, and how many of those avocados went to waste? And then thinking about who picked those avocados. Where were those avocados stored beforehand? Who transported it here? What kind of labor went into getting it off of trucks and off of cargo ships, that kind of thing. So source reduction is the first thing that we need to figure out as far as food waste. That's where the majority of it happens. So that can happen, like I said, in your businesses, your food businesses, but it also can happen at home. And if anyone ever wants just little tidbits about grocery shopping, meal planning, and all that stuff is helpful when it comes to food waste. Please email me. I've got a lot of recommendations for you. So the first thing we want to do with food waste is to feed hungry people first. Of course, that's where Just Food comes in. So donating extra food to food banks, soup kitchens, and shelters. Then we want to feed animals with it. So making sure that we are good stewards of the other living beings on this earth and diverting food scraps to animal food where appropriate. Industrial uses provide waste oils for rendering fuel, conversion, and food scraps for digestion and recover energy. We don't have a lot of stuff in this community that I know of that's doing this type of work. If you know of anybody, I'd love to know more about that. Compost is a huge topic of conversation in this community. We have tried to get curbside compost in this community for since I've lived here, and I moved here about 13 years ago. So that is a ongoing thing. Just Food was very privileged that we got to do a pilot program along with the city, and so we were composting all of our inedible foods, and I'll go into some of those totals later. And then the last resort is to dispose of food waste. But again, we really don't want it to go into the landfill, and I'll tell you why. Pardon me. 351,090 Kansans are food insecure. This was a snapshot right before the pandemic. I guarantee you it's more than that. And again, food insecurity is only what we can measure, right? So at the end of the day, we know that more folks are experiencing unstable food access or still are experiencing hunger due to a variety of other reasons. Okay, so here's like the really intense numbers. 108 billion pounds of food is wasted in the United States each year. That can equate to 130 billion meals. So that's about 40% of all food in the United States is wasted. That means we grow all this food and we just throw it out. Could you imagine, throwing 40% of your groceries out like the second you bring it home? I can't imagine that. So that's 34 million people in the US are facing hunger. But can we solve hunger? Absolutely. We definitely can. There's enough food going around. It's just understanding the systems that are in place that, and also understanding our relationship to food, why we feel so entitled to food that doesn't grow naturally to our area. But when we do get those foods, really knowing, loving, and respecting them, I think is also a very important piece of the puzzle. This is me. I went to Missouri Organics. That's all food behind me, all of it. So US food loss and waste, production, transportation, handling of food embodies 170 million metric tons of carbon dioxide, equivalent to the annual CO2 emissions of 42 coal-fired power plants. It's kind of hard to really take in what that means. So when food ends up in landfills, it generates methane, an even more potent greenhouse gas. It's really hard to measure what methane how much methane is being put out, but keep in mind that food waste is the single most common material landfilled and incinerated in the United States. I went to a summit in Minneapolis back in May, and a speaker there said, it doesn't matter, we can recycle all the plastic in the world, it won't make a dent in it if we don't combat food waste. So that really stuck with me, because how much are we freaking out about which plastic goes into the recycling and all that stuff, but then because the common thing that I hear is, well, it's food, it'll biodegrade out there. And it's like, well, sure. How long do y'all think a head of cabbage takes to decompose? I think it's 25 years. And if it's in a black trash bag, it's just, I'm not a scientist. You all could probably explain it to me better. But from what I understand, is that it's not good. And that we definitely need to understand that this is also value, this is economic value that we're talking about, that this is stuff that is great to put back into the ground to create more food to be able to solve that issue. The food waste feeds climate change. Food fact, if wasted food were a country, it would be the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases after the United States and China. That's another one that kind of knocks you back a little bit. Okay, so why does food waste happen? It happens for a lot of different ways. Uneaten food that's thrown out in homes, stores, and restaurants. Homes, I think, are 34% of food waste in the United States is what we estimate. So start a compost in your backyard. Even if you're not a gardener, there's somebody out there in your neighborhood, a neighbor that wants that. And even if we're not talking about vegetable gardens, your flower gardens, your landscaping, all of those things, organizations and entities like KU could compost to, KU is known for the beautiful flowers, right? It's well, how cool would that be if we knew that all the compost and all the food waste from KU's campus was going into creating these well-known flower gardens that are all throughout campus. How cool would that be? And I think about that in downtown Lawrence as well. So crops that are left in the field become low crop prices, or too many of the same crop being available, which again, it is beneficial to farmers to keep some of that food out there to then be tilled back into the soil. However, there's still a lot of stuff that's just being left behind. And also a lot of food that people aren't as familiar with. So parts of food that, garlic scapes are a big one. So we all take the garlic, but then we don't take the leafy part off it. That's totally edible. It's totally nutritious. It's delicious if you know how to cook it. It's just about that education. Problems during manufacturing and transportation of food. I don't know if I'm targeted about this on TikTok, but I don't know how many things I get of truck spilled of corn, or trucks filled of this, milk or yogurt and all this stuff. And obviously that's not happening all the time, but it's happening enough. And you have to ask yourself, well, like, what is it? Is it that the truckers are overworked and that they're, falling asleep or getting tired at the wheel? Is it that people who work in food service are underpaid and also told, hey, you got to be done by 8 o'clock, you got to go, so they're not able to kind of have more attention in taking out the trash and the food waste? So thinking about some of those systemic issues of why it's happening, why people aren't doing more to combat it, I think are worthwhile questions to ask ourselves. And then food not meeting retailer standards for color and appearance. I think it's really interesting because I've worked in restaurants a whole lot and I've worked in grocery stores a whole lot. Grocery stores, they will get a shipment in, and if it doesn't all kind of look the same, it'll go into shrink. And a lot of grocery stores are really great about giving it to their employees, but still some of it doesn't make it there. And then, but restaurants always take that stuff because it doesn't exactly look like that at the end of the day. So, so just knowing that, like, just understanding that, and understanding that when you are at a restaurant, how important it is to really ask about the portion sizes and things like that. If you know that there's going to be food waste there, like maybe ordering a little bit smaller, making sure that you're taking a box to go and then actually eating that food once it's in your fridge is important. All of this food that you're seeing here was discarded. Look how beautiful it is. So Just Food, in the past year, we have rescued 616,121 pounds of food from food recovery partners that otherwise would have ended up in the landfill. That's significantly lower than what we were doing before. We were getting closer to 1 million pounds per year, but because of supply chain shortages, we're seeing that there's less food being ordered, just less food on the shelves in general. Businesses have really shifted. It used to be like, make it look full, perceived value. And now grocery stores, for the first time I've ever experienced, are okay with a shelf being empty, or, restaurants are more okay with a special running out. And so I don't look at this number as a bad thing. I look at it as like, okay, people are starting to actually like connect the dots and starting to order less, make, smarter menus where things can be reused all over the menu, and things like that. But we're still really proud that we're able to have these partnerships and to get that food and get it onto the shelves when we need it. So 40,772 pounds of rescue food not suitable for human consumption was then given to partner farmers and ranchers for chicken and hog feed. So we hit the feed hungry people first, then feeding animals. And then through that partnership with the city, we were able to compost 19,108 pounds of inedible food waste at Just Food. So far, we've gone almost 4 months now with no waste in the food bank, which is, I find me another food bank that says they don't have any food waste, because I haven't found one yet. So it's something to be really, really excited and proud of in our community, and we're going to continue to do some more interesting stuff with it. So kind of back to Just Food. So talking about adding value to food and reducing barriers and meeting the hunger need. Just this past August, we announced that we signed a lease. If it looks familiar, it used to be Terrebonne. Still smells like Terrebonne, I assure you. And this makes us hungry a lot. So we signed this lease agreement at 805 Vermont Street. And this lease and this location's purpose is to primarily serve as a production facility for our organization. So a lot of the food that is recovered, it's donated or recovered because it's towards the end of its edible life, right? And so some things that are donated on Friday afternoon, we don't open our pantry again until Tuesday. And so that adds days to potential food waste. So what we're able to do is turn that food, we either, we'll freeze it, we'll make it into rice and beans, jambalaya, pho, all these different things with our production manager, who is Chethan Mitchie. He's also the owner of Latchkey Deli in downtown Lawrence, and he works at Just Food full time. Don't know when he sleeps. Haven't asked because I don't want him to start considering sleeping, because there's a lot of work to do. So he's able to come in and make really delicious food that is at the end of its life, add value to it, just with a little bit of culinary knowledge and then create these meals that not only go to our shoppers to feed them, like of course we want them to take sandwiches and things and eat it right away, but what I think is cool about this program is, one, it introduces folks to foods that maybe they have not tried before. When you're living in poverty, trying things is a luxury you don't have, because you can't spend $10 on pho if you're like not sure if you like it. You'd rather order something else that you know you're going to like. And so giving people opportunity to try new foods, to see produce used in a way that maybe they don't know. Again, it doesn't matter how many daikon radishes I put out on the floor if most of our shoppers have never experienced it, don't know how to break it down, don't know how to cook it. So again, it's that holistic nature of addressing food and hunger and food waste all at the same time. And what the main thing that I love about this program is that it's not just about folks who don't have kitchens, and it's not just about folks who don't know how to cook. It's about folks who are also maybe experiencing shift work, who don't have a lot of time in the day to shop, source, cook nutritious meals for the family. So when we do this work, when we are able to cook and provide food for folks, we're giving that time back to families, and being able to give that time back to families in a way that is substantial, where they can maybe talk about the food, talk about how much they like it, and also just get some ideas of like, hey, I really love this. We need to add this to our family recipe book or something like that. So yeah, so we're really excited to kind of we're basically waiting on a health inspection for this before we get started. But this program has been in effect since March of this year, and we've been in temporary locations. We were at the Culinary Commons out at the Douglas County Fairgrounds, and then over the summer, Eudora High School was really kind and let us use their production kitchen while school was out of session. So it kind of came at the exact right time that we needed this location. So we're really excited because it opens up the opportunity for more community partnerships, but also it's basically, you know, even though it's not open to the public, it's just going to be production. It's still something in downtown Lawrence that people are going to be walking by all the time and being like, what is that? And that immediately starts the conversation about food waste and how important it is to not only to us who work in hunger relief work, but also to folks who care about sustainability and care that this community is sustainable as well. I didn't put this on a slide, but I would invite people. The Climate Action Plan of Douglas County is being formed right now. Look it up. They're looking for community input, and there will be a huge aspect of food waste in that. What we as a community also need to realize is that we are a hospitality community. We are, of course, are home to the University of Kansas, which brings in a lot of tourism. And tourism and hospitality is the main economic development of this community. And so by talking to folks about food recovery in this way, hopefully we'll connect the dots and people can then take it out to other communities, but also inviting hospitality into the conversation. Hospitality is a part of food systems, and a lot of people keep it separate, and it's just not separate. And so hopefully this pilot program will continue to grow and get people a little interested in it. And I invite anyone to come and volunteer and to chop some onions. There's plenty of onions to be chopped. So I thank you all for your time, and yeah, and I'll take any questions or anything like that.
I do have a couple questions.
Mhm.
Do we have any online right away, or not yet? So first one that came to my mind is, what funding do we have to support funding at home?
Yeah, 85% of our funding is provided by the community.
Really?
Mhm.
And how does it, like, people just actually make donations?
Just online monetary donations. It's extremely, it's much higher than it has been in years past. And then about, I think it's like 4.5% is from grants. We get some state and county funding. It depends year to year, especially now with pandemic stuff going up and down. But yeah, the majority of it is just in-kind donations. Yeah.
The next one I have for you is the curbside. What were some of the barriers? I'm asking because
Who's on the call? No, just kidding.
Yeah, go ahead.
So most of the barriers right now are, one, we have no composting regulations. So the first thing we have to do and do anything is to have regulations, right? So determining how far it can be away from buildings, especially downtown Lawrence, in the alleyways, a lot of, so the thing is, people are already composting, right? So they're already doing it. There are a few businesses that have popped up in the last year or so, which we knew that would probably happen if the community, local government didn't take action, that was a huge economic development opportunity for somebody to come in. Missouri Organics does very well. So if you're looking to like make some money in this world, starting a composting business is the way it seems to be what a lot of folks are doing. So the biggest barrier for the city or local government is the lack of regulations. And then honestly, just the community hasn't asked for it. People talk about it a lot, and maybe like I'm in a funnel because I work in this space, but there are a lot of things through community surveys that have to do with food waste, but aren't explicit in their surveys. So people think, people are like, well, climate change is really important to me. And like, well, food waste is a part of that, but that's not explicit. And so when you go to a budget, with anything with local government, it's just gonna be really slow, and it has to be explicit. And also the biggest hurdle or barrier that I face in this work in general is the lack of data. There's not a lot of data collection happening within homes about food waste because it's like a little invasive, and also you can't really rely on folks to do it on their own because there's kind of like I think the word waste has a huge negative connotation to it. So I like to say, adding value to food, because it's not wasted food, it's that somebody wasted it. That doesn't mean it's food, that's not good food. So those are kind of the biggest barriers, lack of regulation, and also just it needs to be more explicitly asked. I'm new to policy work. I've contributed to a lot of policy. I have contributed to a lot of grants, but this is the first time. So I'm still kind of learning about a lot of those things. And then to be perfectly honest, there's still a lot of climate change denying happening in our community. So that's like a whole other aspect of it, which, I would love to come into this work and just like not even have to cope with that at all, and just be able to like, all right, we all understand it's a problem, but there is still a lot of explaining that there is a problem that is happening. At the end of the day, we're still, we're still in Kansas, and Kansas tends to have some beliefs that we know aren't true. So we kind of need to make it really explicit, and that's why I like that picture of like the food waste that's behind me. Like, I'm telling y'all, I've never smelled anything like that in my life. That was only one hill. There were 80 of those, all food waste, all about to be turned into compost that's just going to be sold back into the community and used to make great food. And it's a great business plan and a great business model, but nobody wants to admit that their business is contributing to food waste. So it takes really brave people to start to participate in data collection to be able to bring it to communities.
So Dr. Bhattacharya says, first of all, you motivated her to contact the director of food services at the school district to reduce waste, so thank you. And second, so referring back to when you're talking about sourcing of food and that guacamole example, what is a good way to intentionally look at how the food that we are buying is sourced?
Say the question one more time.
How do we intentionally look at how the food that we are buying is sourced?
Yeah. So the first thing I would do is go support our local farmers market. That is the most direct way to give dollars to folks who are providing food. And the thing is that you can go to these farmers market booths and talk to them about their growing practices. Just because they're not certified USDA organic does not mean that their practices are not organic. USD certifications are really expensive, and so if you are a starting market grower, a lot of them wait several years to get that organic certification just because of it costing so much, and it's like a year-long process. I've been through it myself when I worked at Z's Divine Espresso, trying to certify those beans and all the coffee is organic. So it's difficult. So that would be the first thing. We are extremely lucky to have the Merck in our community. I also, I love that they opened up in Kansas City, Kansas. So that is also a really great place. And also get involved with CSAs. CSAs are one of the best direct, and if you don't know what a CSA is, it's I'm blanking on what it stands for. Sorry, what? Community Sustainable Agriculture, which if you also want to talk about like equity work and giving like credit to BIPOC leaders, that was formed by a Black farmer. And I think that history is kind of erased as well. And so understanding that is a huge, it's also economically more viable for the farmer themselves. So find a CSA, find BIPOC growers. I think 2% of land in the United States is owned by Black folks. So making sure that you're supporting those not marginal, like we marginalize them, folks. And yeah, I would say that those are the first two steps, but also understanding our environment. Coffee is a great example. Coffee is only grown within 100 miles of the equator. So there's only one place in the United States that grows coffee, which is Hawaii. So understanding that, and I love coffee, and I'm going to drink it every day, probably for the rest of my life. But understanding where it's coming from, understanding the difference between fair trade and direct trade, understanding the gatekeeping of organic certifications. I think that those are all kind of good steps. And if you are dying to make my family, my partner is Hispanic, so we make tamales every year at the end of at the holidays. And instead of like going after things that are not in season, I try to make my tamales seasonal and local, and just to understand that like that is also part of the culture, right? Is to go outside and to like look at what's available. In my introduction, we touched on that. I grew up in poverty in an agricultural area, so it was about using what you have. But I've also worked in fine dining where we needed the most perfect peppers of all time, and they all need to be the same size and all on the same plate. And so respecting the ingredients, but also giving them dignity and giving your food dignity so that people feel dignified, I think is also really important. So, so a mixture of those things, just get in reach out to the farmers market, get on CSAs, and just understand what's seasonal and what's growing right now.
So another question is, and this might get a little more to the structure of the teaching kitchen that you're talking to. So the question is, have Just Food worked with the Lawrence Community Shelter in the past? I know the shelter has a fair number of food donations, but I think there could be a huge benefit in having some food classes or assistance in nutrition education for people without color.
Sure. Yeah, our community shelter is one of our partners. They get food from us, and they also recover food. I know that agency in particular, has gone through a lot of changes in the last year and a half. But yeah, if they ever wanted to partner with us, I will say our programming is put on hold right now because we currently don't have a program manager. We had no turnover for about 3 years, and now we're experiencing like a lot of turnover. So, bear with us. I'm hoping to get programs going again by January, especially the cooking classes. But I also know that K-State Research and Extension has a partnership with them to do SNAP Ed education. We also go to other places. So, the Willow, kind of like transitional housing situations. We go there and teach classes, but the thing is, none of us are nutritionists on staff, and so if there's anybody who has more credentials and wants to get some volunteer hours, then I would love to have them.
That was a question coming from the Med Center, so maybe it will land.
Yeah, hopefully outreach at justfoodks.org.
And then this other thing is just to share that herbivore farms is a great example of it, non-certified organic, but completely no-till, no irrigation, very passionate farmers working very hard to get that name out there.
Totally, yeah, that's great.
Volunteering?
Yeah.
Would you take students? Could I advise my environmental science students?
Absolutely. Yeah, so we have,
Sign up?
Yeah, so you can go to justfoodks.org/volunteer and you sign up for a volunteer orientation. You basically get a tour, and then you sign up for a shift. A lot of our folks come to us for education requirements. I would say a lot of folks that come to us for education requirements, a lot of them end up staying, a lot of them become volunteers, and we end up hiring a lot of them. So I'm just saying, if you're looking for a really amazing job that does really great community work, volunteering at places, that's kind of, we didn't mean to do that, but we tend to hire our volunteers.
Can you talk a little bit about your staffing? Because it just seems like you're doing so much, and I'm impressed because I feel like there's not that many people doing all the work that you're doing.
Sure. So there's 10 of us, and we have almost 2,000. Let's see. So we have 10 full-time staff, and then our volunteer base makes up for about 10 more staff by the hours that they put in. So we have, I'm not gonna lie, we're in a transitional phase of our organization. We have just finished our strategic planning, and our leadership is in flux. And so but at the end of the day, the folks who work here are not ego-driven at all. And so what we do is we just literally, if somebody presents a problem a few times and it's in our ears, we just combat it. We just go for it. And that's worked for us for a long time. So we are working right now on figuring out how to make things more sustainable long-term. We used to only serve folks that were 185% within the poverty line. So we had an eligibility requirement. We got rid of that during COVID because everyone's job, it didn't matter what your tax return said last year, it just didn't. So we opened it up to everyone. We open it up, we just assume that if people come to Just Food, say that they need food, that's true. So some people ask us, how does that work? How is it sustainable? It's all about our community. If our community believes in this work, then our community will support us, and they have. And so we just kind of continue on that. And I will say that, our like $30 to $50 donations have gone down. So has most food banks in the United States. It happened pretty much right when the child tax credit ended back in May. So what people don't realize that when people in poverty are getting child tax credits, they're making ends meet. When people who are kind of like have higher paying jobs, they get that tax credit, that means they're more likely to donate. And so what people didn't realize, like when a child tax credit is taken away, that means that those $30 to $50 donations also disappear. And also there was like, I don't know, like a huge vote in the state. And so maybe some people's like dollars were going that direction for a while, which is of course amazing and should, and I'm glad people were tuned in. However, it did affect us. And so, so that's why we're trying to stretch that wasted food even more right now, is because we're like, all right, well, we're not picking off all the boxes. We want to make sure that there's no food waste, that we want to make sure that what is coming in is getting used fully. And so that's what kind of started. We've been talking about this production space since before I started at Just Food when I was a volunteer. It has been in the works for maybe 6 or 7 years, and we just finally like we got to do it. Got to make it happen. Did I answer your question? Yeah. I mean, to be honest, and also we all work a lot. We work a lot, but we do it because we care, and we wouldn't. There's no way I would come in on a Saturday if I didn't if it didn't think like, well, okay, well, if I don't do this food drive on a Saturday, then we might not have X, Y, and Z in the pantry on this day. That's just a non-issue or a non-question for all of us on staff.
I have one more question, but I don't want to take. No, go ahead. This on the policy kind of level. You're talking about federal dollars for like lunches at school.
Mm-hmm.
Is any of that at the state level, or is it all federal? Because I remember like this contention thing with one of our senators being unwilling to donate money, like vote for money going to school districts for trans things like that.
Yeah.
And I was trying to think if there's a way to not have it at the federal level for Senate to make that kind of decision at the state level.
Not that I know of, because when it comes to school funding and school lunch funding are like two different things, right? So we have school funding, so that's funding that goes into educational services, and then the school lunch stuff that is overseen by the USDA as well. And so food waste, here's a really great one. So because they have to hit nutritional standards, it doesn't matter if that kid doesn't want milk. Federal government says that you need milk, they give it to you even if they're gonna throw it away. So I can't tell you how many times I've walked into schools and just see full things of milk in the trash. Now, some places have implemented like share tables, if you don't want it, you can put it there, things like that. But then that gets complicated because then you're talking about food safety laws within our state. And once something is served, it technically cannot be taken back. So it gets complicated, and honestly, it's one of those things where I'm like, well, is it good? Is it unopened? If there's anyone from the USDA or from Kansas Department of Ag on here, I mean, I'm sorry, but we're gonna feed people with it. I'm not sorry, actually. I won't apologize. Yeah. Yep. Totally. And so the question about policy is great because I think that people also need to understand that there's such thing as organizational policy versus, policy of law, legality. And so, KU is a huge institution that has tons of organizational policy. Why not talk about food waste, which I will, until it happens. But the hospital is another entity. Douglas County Corrections is another entity I would love to, which they compost all their stuff. By the way, the prison does it. USD 497, of course, is another aspect to that. But another thing I want to say, is that when you are talking about food waste in schools in particular, I like to think about it as like, that's where we need to be inserting this education. So creating programs in which kids are composting in schools, they're understanding why they're doing it, bridging it into a lesson. Then you have all these amazing community gardens that exist in our community, which we could make more. Educating and training culinary workforce within our school to understand how to do farm to school meals, paying them appropriately for that skill set, paying them appropriately at all, and especially for that skill set. And that introduces a concept into children's life that they can then take home to their parents. They will take into the future with them, and that it sticks with them. I grew up in the 90s in the Ozarks, and recycling was a big thing. They didn't go to my parents' work and talk about recycling. They went into the schools and talked about recycling to then get parents involved. And so I think, replacing something of like home economics or something, or food and family and consumer science, like we don't need to phrase it in such a, weird way like that. It's just about being able to shop. People don't know how to shop for stuff. They don't know how to shop for their groceries and how to spend their dollar. And, so keeping that in mind when it comes to educating youth and these types of programs, especially in schools, I mean, I think that, to me, like, that's the way to go. So I would love anybody out there who wants to do more partnerships like that. We're working on it, but it's about that data collection first. So that's what, and I'm not a scientist, I'm not a data person. So I really rely on those partnerships so that, because my job is to tell the story. So, but those partnerships are still extremely important. So if there's a little stat I need, I have those partners to go to.
That was absolutely.
Thank you all. Thank you for coming and tuning in.
Oh, and did you have a video?
Oh, I will send a video to y'all, and you can send it out to whoever you'd like about our production space. I finished it like 10 p.m. last night and presented it this morning, and then I'll put it on my social media. But if you're curious more about this program, or if you're wanting to get culinary skills, I think this is like one of the coolest ways to do it, is because you're going to be taught by a chef, you're volunteering, who knows what happens. Maybe you just like get really passionate and then you want to like start a food business, so no waste food business someday. So yeah, come join us. Thank you all.